criticized Wicker's years in the U.S. Senate, pointing out that Mississippi continues to be in the list of some of the poor rankings. But I just want to ask you, what is it that you think he hasn't done in his seat that you think you could do in order to see Mississippi progress?
Well, to fix a problem, you have to acknowledge that there is a problem. And I think that too many of our leaders for the last 25 or 30 years have essentially ignored the problems that we have in Mississippi because they just whistle past the graveyard. And now all of those issues have come home to roost, and we find that our infrastructure is crumbling. We have a couple thousand bridges that need to be replaced. Our healthcare delivery system is abysmal. We're not doing what we need to do to take care of our K through 12 educational system. And because of those things plus many more, we have a brain drain in Mississippi where we find that 30, 40,000 of our young people have left the state in the last 4 or 5 years. And so what I bring that's different from my opponent is that I am willing to stand up to leadership, and I'm willing to stand up for Mississippians. And I'm not going to be beholden to big corporations or lobbyists, and I don't mind standing up and speaking truth to power and representing the people of the state of Mississippi as opposed to big corporations and lobbyists.
How easy do you think it'll be to see their progress being a part of the minority party?
To see progress? Is that what you said?
Or to
be
able to accomplish some of those things?
First of all, when I'm elected to the Senate and Mike Espy's elected to the Senate, we won't be in the minority. But you do need to understand how to function as a member of the minority. And for 11 years now, I have functioned in the minority in the state capitol. I'm currently the minority leader. So you see progress when you can bring folks across the aisle along with you. And more often than not, you have to beat bad legislation, but sometimes you're able to work together on good legislation. And I have developed those skills in 11 years of working in a deliberative body in which I serve in the minority. And so, you measure success incrementally. And Mississippi's big problems won't be solved overnight. I'm no fool. I don't believe that Mississippi's or the nation's problems will be solved really easily. But you got to begin that work. You have to acknowledge that there's a problem. You have to address that problem, and you have to be willing to work across the aisle to fix the problem.
I know you mentioned the state capitol and the work that you've done there.
Right.
Can I talk about that experience and how that might better prepare you for the seat?
Well, for all the reasons I just said, when you're working in a group of people that's a 122-member body, you're not the guy who gets to make every decision. So you have to forge relationships, you have to build those, and you have to understand the process. You have to understand how to work through the process. You have to learn patience, which was a very difficult thing for me. Patience is the calm acceptance that things can happen in a different order than what you had in mind, right? So when I started working, for instance, on the bill that resulted in all of our microbreweries that we have in this state, I had a lot of opposition. In fact, I had very few friends on that issue, but after 2 or 3 years, a group was formed, and then they hired some folks to help them at the Capitol, and more of my colleagues got on board. And after, I think, 4 or 5 years, we were able to pass a bill that resulted in all of these small breweries popping up around the state. I think there are 14 of them now. And so those are jobs. Those are products that they sell that result in tax revenue. So I think that's an example of how you have to have patience and work through the process, and then you can see results.
I know tonight in the press release it was mentioned that Senator Wicker was invited. Do you know if he'll be here? What do you think about just the lack of, the debates? We haven't had a debate with you guys.
Yeah, so we're holding the 6th of 12 scheduled town halls, and Roger Wicker's been invited to every single one of them. We know that he's not going to show up because he hasn't shown up to any of the others that we've been invited to by neutral groups, such as the Bar Association, Mississippi College Law School, Stennis Press Institute, Millsaps College, all of those. He's not going to show up because he's a coward, frankly. And this is a person who serves in the United States Senate. He's been in Washington for 24 years, and he can't bring himself back home and present himself to the people who he's asking to vote for him. He's got a job, and a part of his job description is to come back to this state and talk about the issues and talk about his votes. And I think it's shameful that he won't come back and engage in that. So the voters don't get to see us side by side. So we're taking our message out to the voters. In this room tonight, you'll see 20, 30, 40, maybe 50 people. We got 100 people in Columbus at that town hall, and I'm answering to the voters directly. And that's what my opponent needs to do as well. And maybe he feels like he can't hold his own in a debate. I don't know what his reason is, but I can tell you that he demonstrates cowardice in not showing up. Not just for me, but for any of these other neutral groups that have invited us to debate.
Now, I want you to kind of talk about some of your main focuses. You mentioned some earlier, but if there is another focus that you want to sort of drive home so everyone watching will know what you're pushing for, kind of take.
Well, Mississippi has 3 huge issues that we're having to deal with on a daily basis, and they are health care, public education, and infrastructure. And when I talk about infrastructure, I'm not talking about just roads and bridges, because I'm talking about our electrical grid, I'm talking about water and sewer and gas distribution lines, and I'm talking about internet. Because even if we were to fully fund MAEP, our public education, K through 12 public education funding formula, if we were to do that tomorrow, schools in the Delta still wouldn't be able to keep up with schools in Jackson, Mississippi, or Madison, or Gulfport, because they don't have access to high-speed internet. So it's not fair to them. So we have structural infrastructure issues all over this state, but they're more acute in underserved communities than they are in communities that are tax wealthy. And the same is true with funding our public education system. If you cut funding, it's going to hurt everybody, but it hurts underserved communities more acutely, because Madison is tax rich, Gulfport, Jackson County, tax rich areas don't hurt as badly when the legislature cuts funding. And then finally, health care. We refuse to take $12 to $15 billion of our tax money back to the state of Mississippi and help our rural hospitals, and provide 300,000 of our brothers and sisters with some payment mechanism so that they don't have to decide, are they going to pay the car note or are they going to take little Johnny to the doctor? That's shameful in my opinion. But in addition to that, our rural hospitals are filing bankruptcy because we didn't do that and help them through this difficult time. And then finally, we would have created 8,000 to 9,000 high-paying medical sector jobs if we had done that. It was a purely political decision. Let's make no bones about it. The governor didn't do the right thing because it was pure politics, and the Republicans didn't do the right thing for pure politics. And my opponent is one of those people who opposes the Affordable Care Act and who apparently wants to end coverage for pre-existing conditions. Can you imagine if you didn't have coverage for pre-existing conditions? I mean, that puts the welfare of your family at risk, and it's just wrong.
This will be my final question. Just how does it feel? You talked about SB as well as a fellow Democrat. 2 Democrats going into the November ballot. I mean, some people say this is probably one of the most divisive times. Maybe not, but it is to some. How do you feel about that? Are you confident? What do you think that could mean for Mississippi, the United States?
Well, I think it would be huge for Mississippi, for the United States, and I think that Mississippi would shock the world, and we will on November 6th when we elect 2 Democrats to represent our state in Washington in the United States Senate. Mississippi hasn't had a Democrat representing us in the United States Senate in Washington for over 30 years. So I'm not fooling anybody. I know it's a long shot, but we have a rare set of circumstances going on in this state, and you can feel it on the ground. We have enthusiasm on our side, on the Democratic Party. We've got both seats on the ballot. We have a 24-year incumbent in my race who really has no accomplishments to speak of. He's afraid to come back and face the voters. And then you have this feeling countrywide that we need somebody who'll stand up to this president. You know, America, through our Constitution, set up 3 co-equal branches of government. Well, Congress is not doing its job. Congress, it has to be a check on this or any other president, and instead what we have is a feckless senator in Washington representing us right now who is incapable of standing up to this president. So People feel that, people recognize that, and people are excited. And I think what you're going to find on November 6th is that there are a lot of crossover votes from independents and moderate Republicans who believe that in Mississippi it's time for change. I think Mississippians are ready for change.